"Ms. Carter, we have to take you into surgery now." The nurse's voice cut through the chaos, but all I could hear was the ringing of my phone. "Mom, please," I whispered, gripping the blanket over my hospital bed. "I don't have anyone else. I need you to pick up the triplets. The doctors say they can't wait." On the other end came laughter, loud music, people cheering. "Oh, Betty," my mother sighed, "everything with you is always an emergency." "It is an emergency." My father's voice joined the call. "We're already outside the arena. Your brother spent months getting us these VIP Bruno Mars tickets. We're not turning around because you couldn't figure out childcare." I didn't plan to need emergency surgery. "You're so selfish," my mother snapped. "You expect everyone else's life to stop because yours is difficult. Raising those 3 kids has made you exhausting." The surgeon stepped beside my bed. "We're running out of time." I looked at the phone one last time. "So, you're really not coming?" "No," my father answered flatly. The line went dead. At that moment, something inside me went silent too. What my parents didn't know was that before they enjoyed the best concert seats of their lives, I was about to make one decision that would change theirs forever. The emergency room suddenly felt much louder after the call ended. Nurses moved around me, checking monitors, preparing paperwork, asking questions I struggled to answer. "Who will be caring for your children while you're hospitalized?" one nurse asked gently. My mouth opened but nothing came out. 3 little faces flashed through my mind. My triplets had just finished preschool that afternoon. They had no idea their mother was lying in a hospital bed, terrified, not only of surgery, but of what would happen to them over the next several hours. "Give me 1 minute." With shaking hands, I opened my phone and searched for emergency childcare agencies. Every second mattered. After several frantic calls, one agency answered immediately. They had an experienced live-in nanny who specialized in emergency placements and could arrive within the hour. "The placement fee is high," the coordinator warned. "I don't care," I replied. "Just make sure my children are safe." Within minutes, I electronically signed the contract, transferred the payment, sent the nanny my home address, security code, pediatrician's information, school contacts, and every instruction I could think of before anesthesia clouded my thoughts. The nurse looked relieved when I explained the arrangement. "Good," she said. "Now we can focus on getting you through surgery." As they wheeled my bed toward the operating room, I opened my banking app one last time. For years, a monthly automatic transfer had quietly left my account without fail. Mortgage assistance, utility payments, medical expenses. Money my parents had come to expect without ever asking how I managed it while raising 3 children alone. My thumb hovered over the screen. Then I pressed cancel automatic transfer. Confirmation appeared instantly. Transfer cancelled. I locked my phone just as the surgeon smiled reassuringly. "We're taking you in now." As the operating room doors opened, only one thought remained in my mind. What would happen when my parents realized the money had stopped? The first thing I noticed when I opened my eyes was the steady beep of the heart monitor. The second was panic. "My kids," I croaked, trying to sit up before a sharp pain forced me back onto the pillow. "Where are my kids?" A woman stepped into the room with a warm smile. "You must be Betty. I'm Hannah, the nanny from Bright Start Care." My shoulders dropped. "They're okay." "They're more than okay," Hannah said, pulling out her phone. "Would you like to see them?" She showed me a picture of my triplets sitting around the kitchen table, each wearing mismatched pajamas, proudly holding up grilled cheese sandwiches they'd helped make. "They asked if Mommy was getting a boo-boo fixed," Hannah said with a small laugh. "I told them you'd be home as soon as the doctors made you feel better." The knot in my chest finally loosened. "Thank you," I whispered. "You don't have to thank me," she replied. "You hired me to help, that's what I'm here for." Later that evening, after the nurses had finished checking my incision, the room grew quiet. For the first time all day, I wasn't focused on surviving surgery. I was thinking about my parents. I opened my banking app and reviewed the cancelled transfers. There they were. the mortgage assistance I had been sending every month, the electric bill I quietly paid because my father had complained retirement was harder than expected, the money for my mother's prescriptions whenever insurance didn't cover everything. None of it had ever been loaned. None of it had ever been appreciated. Those payments hadn't started overnight. Years earlier, after my divorce, I had worked overtime while raising my triplets because I believed family took care of one another. When my parents mentioned they were struggling, I stepped in. At first it was one bill, then another. Soon it became automatic. Every month money disappeared from my account before I even looked at my own budget. Whenever I hinted that things were getting tight, my mother always had the same response. We sacrificed everything to raise you. And I always gave in. The memories came one after another. My brother announcing he wanted to take a last-minute beach vacation. My parents cancelling my birthday dinner to go with him. Christmas mornings rearranged because my brother wanted to sleep in. Family barbecues where my children barely got acknowledged, while everyone celebrated whatever new hobby my brother had picked up that month. Every time I'd swallowed my disappointment. They're still my parents, I'd tell myself. They don't mean it. But hearing my mother call me selfish, while I was lying in a hospital bed waiting for emergency surgery, stripped away every excuse I'd ever made for them. My phone buzzed. Text after text appeared from before I'd blocked their numbers. Don't expect us to feel guilty. You should have planned better. You're always making your problems everyone else's responsibility. I stared at the screen for several seconds. Then I deleted the conversation. Without another thought, I blocked both of their numbers. Next, I updated my emergency contacts at the hospital, removing their names completely. Finally, I logged into my children's school portal and deleted both grandparents from the approved pickup list. Each tap felt strangely quiet. Not angry. Not dramatic. Finaled. The next morning Hannah stopped by before heading back to my house. The kids made you drawings, she said, placing 3 folded pieces of paper on my tray. Each crayon picture showed our little family holding hands. No grandparents. Just us. As I smiled through tired eyes, Hannah hesitated. There's something else you should know. I looked up. Someone has been calling your phone non-stop from numbers you've never seen. By the time I was discharged, I was moving slowly, careful not to strain my stitches. When I walked through my front door, my triplets ran toward me as fast as Hannah could stop them. Gentle hugs, she reminded them. 3 pairs of little arms wrapped around my waist as carefully as they could. We missed you, Mommy. I missed you even more. For the first time since the surgery, I felt like I could breathe again. But the peace didn't last long. My phone lit up with another unfamiliar number. This time I answered. Betty, my aunt asked cautiously, is everything okay between you and your parents? I frowned. What do you mean? They said you cut them off for no reason. They told everyone you won't let them see the children anymore. I stood in silence. That isn't what happened. They also said they offered to help, but you pushed them away. I slowly lowered myself into a chair. The story was already spreading. Over the next 2 days, more relatives called. Some sounded concerned. Others sounded disappointed. You only get one set of parents. They're heartbroken. You shouldn't punish them over one misunderstanding. Each conversation revealed another version of the same story. According to my parents, I had become cold, ungrateful, and controlling after surgery. Not one person had heard about the emergency. Not one person knew they had refused to watch the triplets. Instead of arguing with each caller separately, I made one decision. I invited the family to Grandma's Sunday lunch. If the truth needed to come out, everyone could hear it at the same time. The atmosphere around Grandma's dining table felt tense from the moment I arrived. My parents barely looked at me. My younger brother leaned back in his chair, avoiding eye contact altogether. One uncle finally broke the silence. "Betty," he said, "your parents told us they've been devastated ever since you suddenly cut them out." Before anyone else could speak, I placed a folder on the table. "I didn't come here to argue," I said calmly. "I came with facts." I slid my hospital admission papers across the table. "These are the records showing when I was admitted." Next came the discharge paperwork. Then the timeline from the surgeon. Finally, I opened my phone. These are the messages I received while I was waiting to be taken into emergency surgery. The room became completely silent as I read them aloud. "You're selfish. You're exhausting. We're not missing VIP Bruno Mars tickets because you failed to plan." No one interrupted. No one defended those words. My aunt slowly looked up. "They really said this while you were already in the hospital?" "Yes." Another relative turned toward my parents. "You knew she needed emergency surgery?" My father shifted in his chair. "Well, we didn't think it was that serious." "It was serious enough that they operated within hours," I replied. My mother folded her arms. "She always expects too much from us." I didn't respond. Instead, I opened another folder. These are bank statements. Several heads tilted in confusion. Highlighted payments filled page after page. Mortgage assistance. Utility bills. Prescription reimbursements. Monthly transfers. Year after year. My cousin blinked. "Wait, you've been paying these?" "I have." "For how long?" "Several years." The room erupted with overlapping questions. "I thought your parents were retired comfortably. Why were you paying their bills?" "They never mentioned any of this." My parents immediately tried to redirect the conversation. "This isn't about money," my mother insisted. "She's trying to embarrass us." "No," I answered quietly. "I'm explaining why refusing one emergency favor changed everything." Around the table, relatives exchanged uncertain glances. Pieces weren't fitting together anymore. Everyone turned toward Grandma. She had barely spoken all afternoon. Slowly, she placed her teacup onto its saucer and rose to her feet. Her voice was calm. "Steady. That's enough," she said. "I've stayed silent long enough." Every conversation in the room stopped. No one interrupted Grandma. She wasn't the type to raise her voice, and she almost never involved herself in family disputes. The fact that she had stood up at all made everyone pay attention. I looked at her in surprise. "Grandma." She gave me a gentle glance before turning toward my parents. "No," she said softly. "Today, Betty isn't the one who needs to explain herself." My mother shifted uncomfortably. "Mom, this doesn't concern." "It concerns this family," Grandma interrupted, "and it's gone on for far too long." Grandma reached into her purse and placed a worn envelope on the dining table. "I've kept these because Betty asked me never to embarrass either of you." She opened the envelope. Inside were copies of receipts, handwritten notes and printed emails. "She came to my house more than once asking me how she could help you without making you feel ashamed," Grandma said. I stared at her. I had forgotten she'd kept any of it. "She never wanted anyone to know she was paying your bills," Grandma continued. "She said, 'They're my parents, I don't want the family thinking they're struggling.'" The room fell silent again. My aunt slowly picked up one of the receipts. "This is for their electric bill." Another relative examined a different document. "And this one is for prescription costs." Grandma nodded. "There are years of them." My father rubbed the back of his neck. "We never asked her to do all that." Grandma looked directly at him. "You accepted every payment." He had no answer. She continued, "When Betty's children needed new clothes, she bought them after paying your mortgage." My mother opened her mouth. We appreciated. No, Grandma said firmly, you expected it. That sentence landed harder than anyone expected. No one around the table argued. Grandma's voice remained calm. Do you all remember when Betty missed the family vacation because she said work was too busy? Several relatives nodded. She wasn't working extra because she wanted to, Grandma explained. She was working overtime to keep helping her parents while raising 3 children alone. Confused expressions turned into shocked ones. My cousin looked at my parents. You let her do that. Neither of them answered. Grandma wasn't finished. You also told people Betty rarely helped the family. She pointed toward the stack of bank statements. The truth has been sitting in her checking account for years. One by one, relatives began asking questions. Why didn't you tell us? How could you call her selfish after everything she'd done? You really chose a concert over helping during emergency surgery. Each question made my parents retreat further into silence. For the first time in years, I wasn't defending myself. I didn't need to. The facts were speaking louder than I ever could. I watched as the family pieced everything together: the financial support, the favoritism, the cruel messages, and finally the refusal that had broken whatever trust remained. Grandma gently placed her hand over mine. You carried this burden long enough. I squeezed her hand without saying a word. The gathering ended quietly. Some relatives hugged me before leaving. Others apologized for believing the story they'd been told. My parents walked out without looking back. 2 weeks passed. My recovery improved. The triplets settled happily into a routine with Hannah, who had agreed to stay on as our live-in nanny. Our house felt calmer than it had in years. Then one afternoon, while the children were building a blanket fort in the living room, a loud knock echoed through the house. I walked to the front door, rested my hand on the knob and slowly turned it. When I opened the door, my parents were standing on the porch. For a moment, none of us spoke. They looked different than they had just 2 weeks earlier. My father, who normally carried himself with quiet confidence, kept his eyes fixed on the welcome mat. My mother's shoulders were slumped, and the confidence she'd shown at Grandma's house had disappeared. Can we come in? My father asked. I hesitated, then stepped aside. 5 minutes. They walked into the living room, where the triplets were laughing with Hannah as they finished their blanket fort. Why don't we go make cookies? Hannah suggested, reading the room immediately. The children cheered and followed her into the kitchen. Only after the sound of little footsteps faded did my parents speak. My father cleared his throat. We're having financial problems. I waited. The mortgage payment is overdue, he admitted. My mother looked down at her hands. The utility company sent another notice. We've had to cancel several automatic payments. Neither of them had to explain why. For years I had quietly filled those gaps. Now I wasn't. And after what happened at your grandmother's house, my father continued, the family doesn't believe us anymore. They've stopped calling, my mother added. Some of them won't even answer our messages. The room grew quiet again. My mother finally looked up. We didn't think you'd actually stop helping. There it was. Not an apology. An assumption. I folded my hands in my lap. So you believed you could refuse to help during my emergency surgery, call me selfish while I was waiting to go into the operating room, and everything would stay the same afterward. Neither of them answered. My father sighed. We thought you were angry for the moment. You always cooled off. He wasn't wrong. For years I had. Every hurt had been explained away. Every disappointment had been forgiven before anyone asked. Every sacrifice had become expected. Until the day they chose concert tickets over my children while I was being wheeled into emergency surgery. My mother took a slow breath. We handled it badly. I remained silent. She tried again. We never imagined you'd cut us off completely. You're right, I said calmly. You never imagined there would be consequences. Both of them lowered their eyes. After a long pause, my father spoke quietly. We're sorry. It was the apology I had wanted for years. Oddly enough, hearing it now didn't erase anything. I appreciate you saying those words, I replied. But an apology doesn't undo what happened. My mother blinked back tears. So, what happens now? I answered honestly. I hope you both stay healthy. I hope you figure out your finances. And I truly hope you learn from all of this. They listened without interrupting. But I'm not restarting the payments. Neither of them argued. I'm also keeping my boundaries. If there's ever something that absolutely requires communication, you can send it in writing. I glanced toward the kitchen, where I could hear my triplets laughing over spilled cookie dough. My responsibility is to those 3 children now. They deserve a mother who isn't constantly sacrificing herself for people who won't stand beside her when she needs them most. The words were firm, but they weren't angry. They were simply true. My parents slowly stood. My father nodded once. I understand. For the first time in years, I believed he actually did. They walked to the front door. Neither of us hugged. Neither of us argued. When the door closed behind them, it closed quietly. The weeks that followed felt different. Without the constant financial strain, I finally rebuilt my savings instead of watching every paycheck disappear before the month even began. Hannah became a permanent part of our household. The triplets adored her, and her steady presence gave me the time I needed to recover completely. Grandma visited every Saturday. She'd read stories to the children, help them plant flowers in the backyard, and stay for dinner. The warmth she'd always shown me now filled our home in a way I hadn't realized was missing. Several relatives reached out, not to pressure me but to apologize. We should have asked for your side first, my aunt admitted one afternoon. I wish we had known the truth. I accepted their apologies because they had listened once the facts were in front of them. That was enough. As for my parents, the family dynamic changed permanently. The story they had told everyone unraveled the moment Grandma spoke. People no longer saw them as parents abandoned by an ungrateful daughter. They saw the years of quiet support Betty had provided, and the single moment when that generosity was met with rejection. Losing the monthly financial help forced my parents to adjust their lifestyle, and losing the family's trust proved even harder. Neither loss came from revenge. Both came from the choices they had made. One evening, I stood at the kitchen window watching my triplets chase each other across the backyard, while Grandma clapped and laughed from the porch. The house was peaceful. No anxious phone calls. No guilty obligations. No fear that saying no made me a bad daughter. For the first time in years, I wasn't waiting for the next family crisis. I was simply present with the people who had shown up when it mattered. I finally understood that family isn't defined by who shares your name. It's defined by who stands beside you when everything else is falling apart. The door that closed on betrayal became the one that finally opened to peace.